I used to think a diary was a safe place. Just paper, ink, and a lock that cost $4.99 at the checkout aisle. But the night my family fell apart, I realized it was never a hiding place at all. It was a mirror. And mirrors don't care what you're trying to protect. My life diary didn't just tell my story. It exposed the choice that cost me my family. My name is Linda. And if you're imagining some dramatic scene with slammed doors and shouting, forget it. The real ending was quieter than that. It was the kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop because you can hear every tiny sound you usually ignore. The refrigerator humming, the old floorboard near the hallway creaking, the soft click of a ceiling fan that needs to be tightened. That's the kind of quiet that tells you something is already broken, even before anyone says a word. That evening started like 100 other evenings in our house. Robert was home, earlier than usual, which should have made me happy. The kitchen smelled like the plain chicken I always promised myself I'd learn to season better, and the sink was full of dishes because I'd told myself I'd get to it later. The kids' backpacks were piled by the stairs. Normal, safe, boring. The kind of life people online call blessed. And I wanted so badly to keep it that way that I made the same mistake people always make. I treated peace like it was something you could maintain by not touching the thing that hurts. Robert didn't say much at first. He just moved around the house like he was counting steps, like he was measuring something invisible. When he walked past the hallway table, he paused where my diary usually sat, tucked under a stack of mail and a coupon flyer, as if hiding it under ordinary life could make it disappear. Then he looked at me, and his eyes weren't angry. That was the part that scared me. Anger would have meant we were still fighting for something. What I saw instead was restraint, like he'd already made room inside himself for disappointment. "How was your day?" I asked, because that's what wives ask when they're trying to pretend their hands aren't shaking. He nodded once, slow, and said, "It was fine." But his voice didn't match the word. He set his keys down, with a gentle clink, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and familiar, a pen. My pen, the one I kept in the diary's elastic band, the one I never loaned to anyone. My throat tightened. For a second, I tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I left it on the counter, maybe one of the kids found it, maybe Robert picked it up without thinking. Lies can be sweet like that, soft and easy to swallow. Then he turned the pen between his fingers and asked, almost casually, "When did you start writing again?" I felt my face go hot, like I'd been caught doing something embarrassing instead of something I thought was harmless. Because that's what I'd told myself. It's just writing. It's just me processing. It's just words. But words are not just anything when they're the only place the truth has been allowed to live. My life diary was supposed to be my private release valve, the place I could confess fears I didn't want to burden anyone with. But somewhere along the way, it became something else, a record of little decisions I didn't want Robert to see, tiny justifications that sounded reasonable in the moment. I watched his hand rest on the edge of the table like he was steadying himself, and I understood, all at once, that this wasn't about the diary being found. It was about what the diary proved, that I'd made a choice, and I'd been living like it didn't count. And in the next few minutes, I was going to learn the hard way that one small choice can weigh more than a marriage, more than a home, more than everything you thought you were protecting. Robert did not raise his voice. He did not accuse me. He did not storm off. He just stood there, turning that pen slowly, like he was deciding whether the next sentence would change our lives. I tried to smile, and it came out wrong. My lips felt stiff, like my face had forgotten how to act normal. "I do not know," I said, which was not true. I knew exactly when I started again. I started the week after Robert and I had our first real argument in years, the one that did not end with laughter or an apology or a late-night snack. The one that ended with silence. That is when I bought the little journal at Target, the navy one with the fake leather cover, and I told myself it was for my mental health. A harmless habit. A private place to untangle thoughts so I could show up calmer for my family. That was the story I told myself, and at first, it was even mostly true. I wrote about ordinary things. The way our daughter's laugh sounded like hiccups when she got excited. The way our son always left his shoes in the exact middle of the hallway like he was marking territory. The way Robert would squeeze my shoulder when he passed behind me at the stove. I wrote gratitude lists. I wrote little prayers even though I was not consistent with church. I wrote the kind of wholesome lines that would have made anyone think I was a woman trying her best. And then, slowly, The diary changed tone, because my life had changed tone. Robert and I were not falling apart in some dramatic way. We were drifting. We were busy. We were tired. We were living on schedules and grocery lists, and I will do it tomorrow. Robert had been working longer hours, trying to prove himself at his job, trying to be the man who could keep the mortgage paid and the minivan running and the kids in their activities. I could see the pressure on him even when he did not say it. And I was trying to keep everything else together, which meant I did a lot of smiling while feeling like I was carrying a stack of plates that could slip at any moment. The hardest part is admitting what I did next. I started using the diary as a place to justify decisions I did not want to discuss out loud. Not because I was a villain, but because I was scared. Scared of conflict. Scared of disappointing Robert. Scared of hearing the words out loud that would make a problem real. I told myself I was protecting the peace. I told myself I was keeping the kids away from stress. I told myself Robert did not need one more thing on his shoulders. That is how people like me talk when we are about to cross a line without calling it a line. Robert's eyes stayed on mine, patient but guarded. I found it, he said quietly. It was not where you usually keep it. My stomach tightened because I knew exactly what that meant. It meant he had not just seen the cover. He had opened it. He had read. My brain scrambled for a safe response, something clean and innocent, but I could feel the truth rising like nausea. It is just thoughts, I said, and the word just sounded desperate even to me. Robert nodded again, smaller this time, like he was acknowledging my attempt without accepting it. Linda, he said, and the way he said my name was careful, like he was holding something fragile. You wrote about a choice. He paused, and his throat moved when he swallowed. You wrote it like you already decided I would never know. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, and suddenly I could not hear the refrigerator anymore. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, like it was counting down to something I did not want to face. I looked toward the staircase where the kids' backpacks sat, and for one irrational second I wished I could rewind the whole day. Rewind the last year. Rewind back to the version of me who believed that if you kept a secret in ink, it stayed small. But Robert was standing right in front of me with my pen in his hand, and I understood that the diary had done the one thing I never wanted it to do. It made my private rationalizations visible, and once a choice is seen clearly, you cannot pretend it was nothing. My mouth opened, but nothing came out at first, because there is a specific kind of fear that does not feel like panic, it feels like calculation. In the space of 2 seconds I ran through every possible version of what Robert might have read, which lines he might be stuck on, which words I had used that sounded worse on paper than they felt in my head. I wanted to grab the diary off the table and flip to a different page like that would rewrite the truth. Instead, I held my hands together so tightly my fingers ached. What did you read? I asked, and I hated myself for asking it that way, like the problem was his eyes instead of my choices. Robert did not answer immediately. He glanced toward the hallway, toward the stairs, like he was remembering there were children in this house. Children who did not deserve to hear adults unravel. Then he looked back at me and said, "Enough." That single word felt heavier than a paragraph. I could tell he was choosing restraint, choosing control, choosing to keep the volume low. But control does not make the truth softer. It just makes it clearer. Linda, he said again, slower, you wrote about money. My stomach sank, because money is never just money in a marriage. Money is trust. Money is honesty. Money is respect. Money is the agreement that we are on the same team. I swallowed and tried to steady my voice. I was handling things, I said, and even as I said it, it sounded like the kind of sentence people say right before they get caught. Robert turned my pen once more and set it down on the table, gently, like he did not want to give me an excuse to claim he was being aggressive. You were not handling things, he said. You were deciding things. He took a breath through his nose, and I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. You wrote that you moved money without telling me. I felt heat rush up my neck. I did not want to admit the details, because the details make it real. The details make it undeniable. And the worst part is that, in my head, I had framed it as something responsible, something temporary, something that would protect our family from stress. The truth is, I had been scared about how tight things were getting. Robert's hours were long, but expenses were longer. The car needed repairs. The grocery bill kept climbing, and every school email seemed to come with another request for a fee or a fundraiser. I did not want to be the wife who added financial panic to Robert's list of burdens, so I made a choice. I took a chunk of money from our savings, not a fortune, but not small either, and I used it to cover what I told myself were urgent needs. The problem was not that I paid bills. The problem was that I did it in secret, and I wrote it down like it was a clever solution instead of a breach of trust. I can still remember the night I wrote that entry. I sat on the edge of the bed while Robert was in the shower, steam fogging the mirror, and I wrote, "I will fix it before he notices." I wrote, "This is for the family." I wrote, "He does not need to know." Those were the words Robert had read. Words that made it clear I had decided he was not a partner. He was someone to manage. Robert leaned his hands on the back of a chair, and his voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse. "Do you know what it feels like," he asked, "to think we are building something together, and then realize you have been making moves behind my back?" My eyes stung, but I forced myself not to cry yet, because crying too soon can sound like manipulation even when it is real. "I was trying to keep us afloat," I whispered. Robert nodded once, and his expression was not cruel, just tired. "And you chose to do it alone," he said. "That is what I cannot stop seeing." And in that moment, I understood the real disaster was not the amount, not the bills, not the practical stuff. The disaster was that I had written my justifications like a confession, and the person I was confessing against was the man I promised to trust. Robert's words hung in the air, and I could feel my instincts scrambling to protect me, the same instincts that had convinced me secrecy was safety. I wanted to explain every receipt, every late-night worry, every moment I stared at our bank app and told myself I was being practical. But none of that changed the simple truth sitting between us like an uninvited guest. I had made a decision that should have been us, and I turned it into me. I took a careful step closer, lowering my voice like that would lower the damage. "I was not trying to shut you out," I said. "I was trying to keep you from carrying more." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief, like he had heard that line before. "You do not get to decide what I can handle," he said. "You do not get to protect me by lying to me." The word lying landed hard because I had been avoiding it. I had been calling it managing, taking care of it, handling things. All soft words, all coward words. Robert reached for the diary, not aggressively, just firmly, and slid it a few inches closer to himself. "And that is not all," he said. My heart thudded. I stared at the cover, that harmless-looking navy book, and for the first time I saw it the way Robert saw it. A record of choices, a timeline of secrecy. "What else?" I asked, but my voice had already started to crack. Robert opened the diary to a page he had marked with a folded corner. That tiny fold felt like a verdict. "Here," he said, and he did not read it out loud, which somehow made it worse. He just tapped the page with one finger and looked at me. "Tell me what you meant." I knew the entry. I knew it before my eyes even focused on the handwriting. It was the one I wrote after I met with my friend Sarah for coffee, the one where she had listened to me vent, then offered a solution that felt like relief at the time. She told me about a short-term loan option and a way to consolidate a couple payments, something that could buy breathing room. She also told me, very plainly, that Robert would probably say no because he hated anything that felt like debt. She had said it like she was giving me insider wisdom, and I had taken it like permission. In my diary I wrote, "I will do it first and tell him later, when it is already helping." I wrote, "He will thank me when he sees the numbers." I wrote, "It is easier to ask forgiveness than permission." I had actually written those words, like I was proud of them. My throat tightened. "It was a thought," I said weakly. "It was me panicking." Robert's expression did not change. "Linda," he said, "you wrote it like a plan." The kitchen felt too small. I looked toward the sink full of dishes, toward the fridge covered in kid drawings held up by magnets, toward the calendar with soccer practice circled in blue marker. All of it looked suddenly fragile, like it was made of paper. "Did you do it?" Robert asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes were watching me like a judge watches someone who has already tried to bend the truth. I could have lied. I could have softened it. I could have tried to steer the conversation into a safer lane. But the diary had already done the damage, and I knew one more lie would not be a bandage, it would be gasoline. My chest felt tight as I nodded once. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." Robert shut the diary slowly, like he was closing a chapter he did not want to finish. He exhaled, long and controlled, and when he spoke again his voice sounded different, like something inside him had shifted from confusion to clarity. So you did not just hide what you did, he said. You rehearsed it. You convinced yourself it was the right thing. He paused, and his gaze flicked toward the stairs again, toward our children upstairs, unaware. Do you understand, he asked, that you did not just move money? His eyes met mine. You moved the foundation, and I realized, with a sickening certainty, that this was no longer about numbers. This was about trust being rewritten without consent, and my own handwriting was the proof. Robert's words hit me in a way that made everything else in the kitchen feel distant, like I was standing behind glass watching my own life. You moved the foundation. I wanted to argue with him, to say the foundation was still there, that the house was still standing, that the kids were still asleep upstairs and the calendar still had soccer practice circled in blue. So how bad could it be? But I knew what he meant, because I had felt it too, even while I was pretending I was being helpful. The foundation of our marriage was not the mortgage or the checking account. It was the quiet agreement that we tell each other the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And I had broken that agreement with a smile on my face and a pen in my hand. I did it because I panicked, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I thought I could fix it before it became a bigger problem. Robert's gaze did not soften. You thought you could fix it alone, he corrected. That is the part you keep skipping. He was right, and it made my chest feel tight. Because the choice was not just moving money or taking a loan or talking to Sarah. The choice was deciding that secrecy was easier than partnership. The choice was telling myself that Robert's reaction mattered more than Robert's right to know. And if I am being honest, I was also choosing control. I did not want to have a hard conversation where Robert might say no. I did not want to feel powerless. So I took the power by doing it quietly. Then I wrote myself a story where that made me a protector instead of a person crossing a line. Robert picked up the diary again, not to read, but like it weighed something. Do you remember what you wrote after you did it? He asked. My throat tightened because I did. I had written it the next morning while the kids ate cereal, and Robert was already out the door. I wrote, it is done. I wrote, I feel relief. I wrote, now I just have to keep it stable. And then I wrote the sentence that makes me cringe even now. I cannot let him ruin this by overreacting. I had turned my husband into an obstacle in my own mind. Robert did not need to quote it. His face told me he had seen the attitude behind the ink. I was wrong, I said quickly. I see that now. Robert's mouth pressed into a thin line. Seeing it now does not erase it, he said. His voice was still controlled, but something in it sounded more final than before. Tell me the numbers, he added. How much? My stomach dropped again, because numbers are concrete. Numbers remove all the room for interpretation. A little over $5,000, I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Robert blinked slowly. He did not flinch like I expected. He just stared at me like he was doing a different kind of math. So it was not just a bad day, he said softly. It was a plan you carried out. I reached for the edge of the table like I needed something to hold on to. I was going to tell you, I insisted. I just needed time. Robert let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. That is the thing about secrets, he said. They always need more time. He glanced toward the stairs again, and his eyes changed, like he was picturing our kids waking up in the morning and coming downstairs to two parents who no longer felt like a team. When he looked back at me, his voice lowered even more. Linda, he said, when you wrote it down, you did not just confess. You committed. I felt tears rise, hot and urgent, but I forced myself to stay present. What do you want me to do? I asked and I meant it. I wanted a checklist. I wanted steps. I wanted a way to fix it like a bill you pay and move on. Robert's eyes held mine for a long moment, and then he said the sentence that changed everything. I do not know if I can trust the version of you who can write that and sleep at night. And there it was, the real cost of my choice, not dollars, not interest rates, but the possibility that the person who knew me best no longer felt safe with me. Robert's sentence did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a diagnosis. I do not know if I can trust the version of you who can write that and sleep at night. I felt my throat close up because I wanted to argue that I did not sleep. Not really. I wanted to tell him about the nights I stared at the ceiling, counting responsibilities like sheep, the nights I woke up at 2 in the morning and checked our balance like it was a pulse. But I knew what he meant, and my excuses were not going to rebuild what I had cracked. I did not sleep, I whispered. I just pretended I did. Robert's eyes stayed on mine, searching for something, maybe remorse, maybe honesty, maybe the first sign that I could stop performing and start telling the truth without packaging it. Then why did you write it like that? He asked. Why did you write about me like I was the problem? The question landed hard because I had not just hidden actions. I had hidden my attitude. In the diary, I had made Robert the villain for having boundaries I did not want to face. I took a shaky breath. Because I was scared you would say no, I admitted. And I did not want to feel like I had no options. Robert's jaw tightened. So you took my option away, he said. I nodded, and the tears I had been holding finally spilled over, but I did not wipe them quickly. I let them fall because I was done trying to control how this looked. Yes, I said. I did. There was a long silence, the kind where you can feel time moving. Then, from upstairs, we heard a soft thump and a sleepy voice. Our son calling, Mom? My body tensed automatically, every instinct to protect the kids kicking in at once. I glanced at Robert, and he glanced back, and for the first time in that whole conversation we were aligned on something. They could not be part of this moment. Robert cleared his throat and called up, calm and steady. We are here, buddy. Go back to bed. We will see you in the morning. A pause, then a muffled, okay, and the house went quiet again. That tiny interruption made the situation feel even more real. We were not two people having an argument in a vacuum. We were parents standing in the kitchen of a shared life, trying not to let our children hear the ground shifting beneath them. Robert rubbed his hand over his face like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. How long? He asked. How long have you been making choices like this? I swallowed. I could have tried to minimize it, to say it was one time, one mistake, one rough month. But the diary had a timeline, and he had already seen enough to know the truth had layers. It started a few months ago, I said. At first it was just me keeping things from turning into arguments. Robert gave me a look that said he could not believe I still used the word just. I corrected myself quickly. It started with me avoiding hard conversations, I said. And then it became me making decisions without you. Robert's shoulders dropped slightly, like the weight of it was settling in. And Sarah, he said, and my stomach clenched again. You wrote about her like she was your partner in this. I felt shame crawl up my neck. Sarah was not a bad person. She was a friend who saw me stressed and offered a workaround. But I had crossed another line by inviting someone else into a space that should have been reserved for my husband. She gave advice, I said, and then I shook my head because even that sounded like a dodge. I asked her, I admitted. I asked her because I knew what you would say, and I did not want to hear it. Robert stared at the diary on the table like it was a stranger sitting with us. So you built a second team, he said quietly, without telling me. The shame was sharp, but beneath it was something even uglier. I realized I had enjoyed the feeling of being praised for handling things. Sarah had told me I was strong, resourceful, capable, and I had soaked it up because at home I was tired and unseen and afraid. I had mistaken outside validation for support. I had traded partnership for the illusion of control. Robert's voice was low, almost flat. What else did you not tell me? He asked. That question was the real turning point, because I could hear the unspoken part. If there is one secret, there are more. My mouth went dry. I looked at him and saw a man trying to decide whether the person in front of him was still his wife or someone he did not know. I could feel my old reflex rise up, the reflex to protect myself with partial truths. But I also knew that if I held anything back now, I would confirm his worst fear. So I forced myself to breathe and said, I will tell you everything. Robert's eyes flickered, not hopeful, not yet, but attentive, like he was giving me one chance to stop being the version of me who wrote lies neatly and called them love. I forced myself to slow down, because rushing would sound like I was reading a prepared statement instead of telling the truth. Robert stayed quiet, arms resting at his sides, but his posture was tense, like he was holding himself in place. The diary sat between us on the table, closed now, but it felt open anyway, like it was still speaking. The loan was not the only thing, I said. My voice sounded too small in the kitchen. Robert's eyes did not widen. He did not interrupt. He just waited, and that silence felt like a test I had already failed once. I also moved money from savings to other times, I continued. Not huge amounts, but enough that it mattered. I swallowed. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would replace it before you noticed. Robert's mouth tightened. And did you replace it? He asked. The question was simple, but my answer was not. Not all of it, I admitted. I tried. I cut corners. I skipped things. I told the kids no more often. I sold a few things online. I was trying to patch it quietly. Robert looked down for a second, as if he was picturing the invisible holes I had created. When he looked back up, his voice was steady but colder. So you made our life smaller, he said, without telling me why. That sentence hurt because it was true. I had been controlling the story our family lived inside, and I had not given him the right to be part of it. There is more, I said, and my hands trembled as I pressed them against the edge of the table to keep them still. I did not tell you about the overdue notice until after I paid it. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. What overdue notice? He asked. My throat went dry. The electric bill, I said. It was not shut off or anything like that, but there was a late notice. I panicked. I paid it immediately, then I hid the paper. The shame in my chest turned hot. I did not want you to think I could not manage things. Robert stared at me, and for the first time I saw anger flicker in his face, not loud, not explosive, but sharp and present. This is not about you managing, he said. This is about you making me the last person to know what is happening in my own home. I flinched at the phrase my own home because it sounded like he was already separating himself from me. I was trying to protect you, I said again, then stopped because the words tasted wrong now. They sounded like an excuse, and I was tired of excuses. No, I corrected myself. I was trying to protect myself from your reaction. I did not want to feel judged. I did not want to feel like I failed. Robert's eyes locked on mine, and his voice lowered. And what did you write about me? He asked. The question made my stomach turn because it was not about what I did anymore. It was about how I thought about him when he was not in the room. I hesitated, then spoke carefully, because there was no safe way to say this. I wrote that you would not understand. I admitted. I wrote that you would make it worse with stress. I wrote that you would blame me. Robert's face went still. So you did not just hide actions, he said. You hid contempt. The word contempt hit me like a slap, not in violence, but in truth. I did not mean it like that, I whispered. Robert shook his head once. But you wrote it like that, he said. Then he reached out, took the diary, and opened it to another page. His eyes scanned for a moment, and I watched his expression shift from controlled to wounded. You wrote, he said slowly, that you had to keep me calm like I was one of the kids. My breath caught, because I remembered writing that line. I remembered feeling powerful when I wrote it, like I was the only adult holding everything together. And now, seeing it through Robert's eyes, I realized what it really was. Disrespect dressed up as responsibility. Robert closed the diary again, very gently, and when he spoke his voice sounded strained, like he was holding back more than words. I can work through money problems, he said. I can work through stress. But I do not know how to live with someone who thinks I am a problem to manage. And in that moment, I understood the diary was not the worst part. The worst part was that my own handwriting had revealed the version of me I had been becoming, quietly, steadily, one secret at a time. Robert's last sentence left a hollow space in the kitchen, like he had pulled a piece of air out, and everything else rushed to fill the gap. I stood there, blinking too hard, trying to hold my face together because I could still hear our children upstairs, and I did not want them to come down and see their mother unravel. I do not think you are a problem, I said, but the words sounded thin, like paper trying to cover a crack in glass. Robert's eyes did not soften. Then why did you write it that way? He asked. He was not asking for poetry. He was asking for the truth that would finally stop moving. I swallowed and let my shoulders drop, because I realized I had been bracing for a fight when what Robert wanted was clarity. Because I was ashamed, I admitted. And because it was easier to blame you in my head than admit I was scared. Robert stared at me for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair out and sat down heavily, like his body finally accepted what his mind had been resisting. He rubbed his temples and spoke without looking up. Do you know what I did when I found it? He asked. My chest tightened. What? I whispered. I read it twice, he said. The first time I was hoping I misunderstood. The second time I was checking if you ever wrote, even once, that you were going to tell me the truth. He looked up then, and his eyes were red around the edges, not from crying, but from strain. You never did, he said. I opened my mouth to protest, but I could not, because he was right. I had written about timing, about strategy, about managing him, about keeping things quiet. I had not written about confession. I had not written about partnership. I had written like I was planning around him, not with him. I thought I was buying time, I said softly. I thought if I could fix it first, then you would not worry. Robert's laugh was bitter and quick, nothing like his usual laugh. You do not buy trust with secrecy, he said. You spend trust when you keep secrets. The words made my stomach twist because they sounded like something you cannot undo. Like a bank account that went negative without you noticing until it was too late. I took a breath and tried a different approach because I finally understood that begging would not work if I still refused responsibility. I want to repair this, I said. I will show you everything. I will give you access to every account. I will cut up the card. I will do counseling. I will do anything. Robert's eyes flicked toward the stairs again, and when he spoke his voice was quieter. You keep saying you will do anything, he said. But you were willing to do anything before, too. Just not the one thing that mattered. I frowned through tears. What is the one thing? I asked. Robert looked at me like I should already know. The hard conversation, he said. The moment you came to me and said, we are struggling, and I am scared, and I need you. His voice tightened on the word need, as if it hurt him that I had refused to need him. You chose to be alone, he continued. And you chose for me to be alone, too, without even telling me. The kitchen felt colder. I shook my head, frantic. I did not want to burden you, I said. Robert's eyes flashed with something sharp. Do not call me your burden, he said. The sentence hit like a boundary drawn in permanent marker. He stood up from the chair, slowly, and for a second I thought he might walk away, go upstairs, shut the bedroom door. Instead, he stayed right there, but his distance grew anyway, not in feet, but in feeling. I cannot do this tonight, he said. Not with the kids here, not like this. My heart pounded. So what happens now? I asked. Robert hesitated, and that hesitation scared me more than any sudden decision. Then he said, carefully, tonight, we sleep. Tomorrow, we talk about what this means. He picked up the diary and held it in his hand, not like evidence anymore, but like a warning. And Linda, he added, voice low, if there is anything else you have not said, you say it before morning. Because if I find out later, it is over. The word over did not come with drama. It came with certainty. And in that moment, I realized the most dangerous part of my choice was not what it cost in money. It was what it cost in time, because trust can take years to build, but it can collapse in one night when the truth finally stops being private. That night, after Robert went upstairs, the house felt like it had been emptied even though everything was still there. The same magnets on the refrigerator. The same backpacks by the stairs. The same dim light over the sink. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the diary like it could speak first and spare me from having to. But it stayed silent, because it had already done its job. I walked to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, listening for any sound from upstairs, any hint of what Robert was thinking. The quiet did not comfort me anymore. It accused me. I did not sleep. I tried, but every time I closed my eyes I saw Robert's face when he said the word over, not as a threat, but as a boundary. I thought about telling myself one more comforting lie, the old one, the one that says tomorrow will be better if you just try harder. But Robert's line in the sand made that impossible. If there was anything else, I had to say it before morning. I replayed every entry I had ever written, every moment I chose to hold something back, every sentence where I made Robert sound like an obstacle instead of the man I promised to build a life with. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop even further. The diary did not just reveal what I did. It revealed who I became while doing it. A person who preferred control over closeness. A person who called avoidance peace. A person who treated honesty like a risk instead of a requirement. Around 3 a.m, I walked upstairs and stopped outside our bedroom door. I could hear Robert breathing, slow and steady, and it hit me how unfair it was that he had to carry my choices in his mind while I stood there trying to decide what was safest for me. I did not knock. I did not wake him. I turned around and went back down, because I finally understood that love without courage is not love. It is comfort dressed up in good intentions. When morning came, the kids came down first, asking for pancakes like it was any other day. Robert came down a few minutes later, calm, polite, and distant, like he was playing the role of dad, while keeping husband locked behind a door I could not reach. He looked at me once, and his eyes asked the same question without words. Are you done hiding? I opened my mouth, and for the first time in months, I did not reach for a strategy. I reached for the truth, because I finally saw the lesson carved into my own handwriting. The family I thought I was protecting did not break when my secret was found. It started breaking the moment I chose secrecy over partnership.